Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Cases. I'm Shant Kerbabian. Capital punishment, or the death penalty, is a legal process whereby a person is put to death by the state as a punishment for a crime. The phrase capital punishment comes from the Latin word of the head. A corporal punishment, however, such as flogging, takes its name from the Latin word for the body. Capital punishment has in the past been practiced by most societies as a punishment for criminals and political or religious descendants. Historically, the carrying out of the death sentence was often accompanied by torture, and executions were most often public. Capital punishment is used in many countries around the world. According to Amnesty International, as at May 2012, 141 countries have abolished the death penalty, either in law or in practice. In the European Union member states, Article 2 of the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union prohibits the use of capital punishment. The Council of Europe, which has 47 member states, also prohibits the use of the death penalty by its members. The United Nations General Assembly has adopted in 2007, 2008 and 2010 non-binding resolutions calling for a global moratorium on executions, which a view to eventual abolition. Although many nations have abolished capital punishment, over 60% of the world's population live in countries where executions take place, such as the People's Republic of China, India, the United States of America, and Indonesia, the four most populous countries in the world, which continue to apply the death penalty. Each of these four nations voted against the General Assembly resolutions. To discuss the capital punishment, the arguments for it and against it, we're joined today in the studio by Mr. Bassam Kantar, journalist and human rights activist, and also via satellite from Beirut, Mr. Hussein Itany, human rights activist and advocacy trainer. Welcome, gentlemen. Now, before we start our discussion, we have a report. Let's check it out.
Amnesty International issued a report saying that at least 778 executions were carried out in 2013, with an increase of at least 96 cases in 2012. The report documents executions in 22 countries in 2013, a rise on the previous year when executions were recorded in 21 countries worldwide. The countries with the highest number of executions were China, North Korea, the United States, and some Middle Eastern countries. Now, according to the report, what was the situation on the global level in 2013? Amnesty International believes that China executed more people than the rest of the world, but data of people who faced capital penalty is a state secret issue, so the number of cases is anonymous, yet in thousands. Africa alone carried out more than 64 executions, where 5 countries were seen responsible, with a rise for more than 50% from 2012. However, the report stated that Somalia, Sudan, and Nigeria are in charge of more than 90% of the total executions in the African continent. Moreover, among the countries in the Americas, the United States is the only country to have carried out executions in 2013. Texas alone accounts for 41% of the capital punishment. With the exception of Belarus, whose death penalty is embedded in its legal system and sentenced 4 people to death, Europe remained execution-free in 2013. In the same year, 4 countries that had not used the death penalty for long periods carried out executions. Indonesia had its first execution in 4 years, Kuwait had its first execution in 6 years, Nigeria its first execution in 7 years, and Vietnam had its first executions in 18 months. Now, the recent shocking incident is that of Egypt, where an Egyptian court sentenced 529 supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood to death on charges related to violent clashes and the murder of a police officer. On this level, will Egypt carry out the verdict and add up to the execution rates in the Middle Eastern countries?
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Bassam, welcome to Cases, and thank you for being here. Mr. Bassam, according to the Amnesty report, which was also in our report, we've seen 96 increase of cases comparing to 2012 and 2013. First of all, in your opinion, what is the reason of the increase that we're seeing in the rates, in the numbers of this of capital punishment or the death penalty? And also, what is your view, what is your position on the capital punishment?
As you mentioned in the report and also in your intervention, the countries that are still practicing execution against in their criminal courts are big countries. For example, in the United States of America, this is something related to the rate of the crimes and to the process of justice.
Of course, we're talking about the United States in general.
Yeah,
there are some states who are abolishing it, but in general, the United States still applies death punishment.
So the increase in total is something related to the practice, and also it's related to the total average of the countries, whether they abolish the execution in the law or in the practice. I think that the main reason for the countries to review such an act is related to their review in the Human Rights Council, where every 4 years all the countries are under review, and usually the recommendations from all the countries, even some countries for political reasons, usually recommend other countries to abolish execution even if they are practicing the death penalty in their courts. So it's a general trend nowadays in the human rights standards, in the United Nations conferences, and in the United Nations General Assembly and the Human Rights Council.
But these resolutions or whatever recommendations that are out there, they're non-binding. Like,
yeah, sure, they are non-binding because this is something related to the sovereignty of every state. But for example, when you have a regional or at least a sub-regional conventions, usually all the countries in the region will obey and will practice, will abolish such a practice. In Europe, for example, is a good example on how all the European Union countries are now abolishing such an act in their laws, in their national laws. Usually, the example of the United States of America is an exception, because usually the state administration consider that they cannot ratify any international convention or any international human rights standards unless it is ratified on the federal and national level. This is something for sure against international law, because usually you put your signature on any convention, you announce that you are ready to practice it, and later you go for the ratification. Unfortunately, in the issues related to the landmines, boycott, the cluster bombing, even sometimes some articles in the in the child International Convention for Child Rights, usually the U.S. Is not ratifying and is not adopting, just because it is a part of their foreign and international policies.
Mr. Bassam, allow me to ask you this question about your position regarding the death penalty.
Well, actually, if we go back 50 years ago, usually such a practice was described as a part of the giving the families of the victims the psychological effect, and that the crime that was committed against their beloved persons have been also practiced against the people that caused such a crime. Nowadays, there is a new debate on the international level from the point of view of the Human Act and from the human rights standards, that you cannot commit a crime in order to give a justice for the people that they were a victim of a crime. This is something that it is under debate. For sure, the cultural, religious, and social standards in every country is part of this debate. For example, in Lebanon now, the issue is like most of the political parties are announcing that they are accepting that the country is not practicing the execution. Even some courts are now announcing a lot of decisions related to executing some criminals, but usually the debate, for example, in Lebanon is related in particular with the issues related to the allowing the enemies interfering in the sovereignty of a country, and also helping the enemy to win the war. This is one of the main or major causes of the death penalty in the Lebanese criminal law.
Okay.
So when you discuss such an issue, you will directly go to the debate about the Israeli occupation to the country and how many people that they were helping the Israeli occupation.
Yes, accused of treason.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so the general debate about this issue is related in 90% to the matter of the Israeli occupation among most than 3 decades for the country.
It's a very serious and a dangerous debate because it has two mixed feelings. You have the national feeling, the feeling towards the country, but at the same time you have the human rights issue that is facing. And so, where do you stand here? What is the position to take best?
Well, I think that on a personal level, I highly recommend that Lebanon will abolish such a practice in the law. We have the life sentence, and we should also consider the conditional release for any criminal after he will spend a long time in the Lebanese prisons. We are speaking about a country where we are facing a lot of problems related to the prison system and to the rehabilitation of the prison system itself. All our prisons are crowded and there is a lot of people in it, but the solution is not to implement the execution of more than 60 Lebanese citizens and foreigners that they are now facing such a penalty. The most also unacceptable punishment is that the people that they were already that the court gave them the a trial for an execution are still waiting. They don't know actually whether they in any time the police will call them for the practice of this, and for sure this will lead for a more psychological punishment for them. Okay.
Now allow me now to go out to our guest in the satellite from Beirut, Mr. Hussein Itany. Mr. Hussein, according to the Amnesty report numbers, we have 700, and if I'm not mistaken, 78 people who were subjected to the death penalty in 2013. But what was interesting, what happened in Egypt recently, where 529 Muslim Brotherhood supporters were sentenced to the death penalty, which is like one shot, and it will actually be more than in one day. Egypt could be responsible for the death for executing 529 people. What can we say about this this call?
What I say that is, first, good evening, and thank you for having me here. The recent events in Egypt were very, very sad and the tragic, definitely. And having people killing each other is all did aggravate the negative feelings among the general population. And what's interesting is that internationally, people are getting more aggressive and more negative, and they have the feeling of vengeance. They want to avenge their death. So what's happening in Egypt is these very high mixed emotion hormonal reaction, if I may label it, and the sentencing 529 person to death is some sort of a mass murder actually, and it was all because of one police officer. Now I don't want to dwell on this case in specific in the sense of...
let's not get into the details of the case.
But for me, it's what I thought about it at first. It is the death sentence in the Arab country in specific. They are just a legal approach or legal alibi for a government to kill its own people more than leading a justice and just life and having justice served. So this is why such events, such enormous number of death sentence is actually harmful for the human conscience and internationally. So yeah. But
Mr. Hussein, according to one of the arguments for the death penalty, it's retribution. It says like all guilty people deserve to be punished, and most importantly, guilty people need to be punished in proportion to the severity of the crime. So what can we say about this argument?
Yeah, it's about as well retaliation and people getting their rights and whatsoever.
Exactly.
I do understand these feelings, but as human beings in 2014, and we're moving forward, we need to move forward and learn how to embrace each other more, to have more positive attitude towards each other, to understand the offender, why he did the offense. And I do believe in the system which is called restorative justice, in which they handle the offender and the one who was offended in a way, or violated in a way that understand the needs of both, and understands what lies behind these offense crime. Because in the end, I think justice will be served if the offender understood what is the severity of thing. If he died, if you killed this guy, he would never understand, because he's dead, obviously. He will never understand the severity, and the other people would never learn. They will only fear from this, from such sentence, without understanding why it's wrong to do such an offense. And this does not help advancing as human beings, as a race.
But but at one point, sometimes we're talking about criminals, Mr. Hussein. We're talking about people who are mentally or psychologically not stable, or we're talking about people who are not ready, or they need rehabilitation. So how can we deal with this issue here?
Exactly. So within the restorative justice system, you deal with such psychological problem with psychiatrists, and we didn't advance in such sciences not to use them, because in the end, each person did what he did because of certain reasons, certain motives, and he was living, or she was living, in a certain situation which led him to such hard life, and we cannot ignore this. We can't just say that these criminals just came out from the sky all of a sudden and they are people, dehumanizing them. They are human beings, so we have to think about it in such a way. And I think in Lebanon, it's really interesting, the fact that we have to have a signature of the three heads of the states, in the sense of the head of the parliament, the head of the government, and the president, before executing anyone. And this is a move forward towards abolishing the death penalty, regardless of the religious debate.
Okay. Gentlemen, we have to stop here, and we'll take a short break, and we'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen. Stay tuned.
The crisis of capitalism, the European impasse, the energy shortages, the emerging power of Asia, the economic power of the Arab world, the economic debate, informative, revealing, and progressive. It discusses the economic event of the world.
Economic debate, where the numbers reveal the truth.
Time. Variable. Event. The only constant variable in life is change. Broader perspective. Arguments and counter-arguments on our platform.
Global Insights. The globe on our platform.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Bassam, I was talking earlier to Mr. Hussein, and he talked about using psychology and using the psychological factor to countering this problem. One of the psychological things that could be used through the death penalty is deterrence, is justifying the capital punishment by arguing that executing convicted murderers could actually deter other murderers from committing crimes. How can we counter this argument?
Let's speak about records. Who gonna prove that this equation is true? If you review any statistics related to the crime records in any country, even in rich communities, in poor communities, crime records is not related in any way to the issues related to the death penalty and to the practice of such a penalty. For example, let's take the community, the drug dealers community in Brazil, for example. This is a very strong community where the police is on a daily basis chasing them, and a lot of trials that have been practiced there. and usually the community is still strong and is still harming the Brazilian society with drugs, and all the trial system will not lead for a solution for such a crimes unless there is a real development for the communities and give them the alternatives. We have some severe examples, like in the States, you can give some examples of a serial killers that they killed 40 or 60 people. This is an exception. It's not the case where you can find like the majority of the public opinion is accepting to practice the execution against such a criminals. But again, there is also examples of a serial killers that they have been rehabilitated and they were reintegrated in the society, and they continue their life with and they give a good example for how a person, even who commit a lot of crimes, that can be a different person if we give him a chance.
Mr. Bassam, allow me to interrupt you here because we are going to take a phone call from Mr. Mahmoud Bailoun, a religious researcher. Mr. Mahmoud, welcome and thank you for being on Cases. Mr. Mahmoud, I'm going to quote a couple of verses from the Quran and ask for religious perspective and for a religious point of view to the death penalty. The first one comes from the Quran, from Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse 32, which says, "For this reason did we prescribe to the children of Israel that whoever slays a soul, unless it be for manslaughter or for mischief in the land, it is as though he slew all men, and whoever keeps it alive, it is as though he kept alive all men." And the second one is from Surah Al-Nisa, verse 93, which says, "And whoever kills a believer intentionally, his punishment is hell. He shall abide in it, and Allah will send His wrath on him and curse him and prepare him a painful chastisement." Now, what could be the argument, the religious point of view of the death penalty?
Verses that you just quoted talk about the value of the human life. My life is as worth to me as anybody else's, and it's worth for me, for example, the life of all of humanity, because if I lose my life, I'm no longer part of this world and I lose everything that I may have. In Islam, you have to understand that in addition to God Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala putting a high value on human life, the way that the system is set up, the punishment system, sometimes there are harsh penalties, but the burden of proof is also very harsh. This is why you see in Islamic history that punishment, capital punishment, or any other harsh punishment was not applied in the same frequency as you would see today in other societies. The punishment is extremely high, but it's applied in a very rare case. The objective of this is not to simply apply the punishment, but to deter people from going into the reasons that take them into taking somebody else's life. There is another verse that says, وَلَكُمْ فِي الْحَيَاةِ وَلَكُمْ فِي الْقِصَاصِ حَيَاةٍ, meaning that punishment, there is life for you in Surah Al-Baqarah. If you apply punishment, there is actually life for all of society. Because you punish one person, everybody learns from it, and the deed that leads to it is stopped in the society, and everybody benefits from that.
But Mr. Mohammed, from a human rights perspective, can we actually create a formula that could actually find a common ground between the religious approach and the human rights approach to this issue?
Well, I don't think there is actually a contradiction. The reason Allah has dictated this is for the sake of human rights. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is looking at the human rights of all over humanity. If humanity wants to live a good life, if humanity wants to live a life with no sins or with nobody taking the life of somebody else or the rights of somebody else, then those who are thinking about taking the rights of somebody else have to think twice and 3 times and 4 times before they actually do that, before they actually commit anything that would result in taking away the human rights of another human being or the human rights of society in general. So this is where the punishment itself is in line with human rights in general. There is no contradiction. We're not talking about two different things that we're trying to consolidate or reconcile.
Mr. Mohammed, one final question, which is why do you think the states that are the Islamic states are taking the punishment, the states and not the religion, a bit too far?
So you are talking today about the human societies that we have today, I think. Whether they are actually applying the Sharia and applying Islamic law. I think you'll find different perspectives or different levels of applying what was dictated by Allah and stated in the Quran. We cannot take these as examples today. We can take it from an academic standpoint, but the applications that we have today vary. There is the different spectrums and different ways of applying it. To the extent that you can see maybe the spirit of Sharia, but the Sharia itself, it's very rarely you find it applied to the extent that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has dictated. Okay,
Mr. Mohammed Bailoun, thank you very much for this very interesting point of view, for letting us in on a religious perspective. Thank you for being with us from Dubai. Thank you. I would like to go to our guest, Mr. Hussein Itany, and take his comment on this point. Like, we went into a very interesting debate here, which is the religion and the death penalty or the capital punishment. Mr. Hussein, do you think there is any contradiction with the terms human rights and religion when it comes to capital punishment, when it comes to death penalty?
Not at all. I don't think there are contradictions, actually. And the thing is that I'm not here to say what the religion is with or against. I'm not a religious scholar.
No, that's not the debate. That's not the point.
Sure.
Yes.
But what I want to say is that if you read the Quran, or if you read Islam specifically, because this is my faith, actually, you can read it in the sense of religion trying to preach and teach the world more about tolerance, more about a humanitarian approach, that doesn't teach about avenging others. It doesn't encourage such actions. Actually, it favors if you have someone who murdered someone from your family and you want to take your right. It favors to actually to forgive the offender more than just take your
Mr.
right.
Hussein, allow me to interrupt you here. Then why it is that we see the capital punishment more in states who supposedly apply, who are Islamic states, supposedly?
Yeah, unfortunately the thing is that ever since the debate started about death penalty in the early 50s within the International Council and the UN, the reasons were always more secular reasons among the, I'm talking here about the Arab Islamic states, were always secular reasons. It's a way to teach our people how to deal with, how to not to commit crimes and etc. It's in early 1980 that started, that these Arab states started, our Islamic states started talking about religious reasons, and this is when it all started, actually, and we see communities learning about religious practices. But the thing is that if you listen to Tariq Ramadan, who is a big preacher, a big scholar, actually, Islamic scholar, he's talking about these Islamic states using the death penalty as a way to, if I want to say it, terrorize its own people more than having justice served, because man-made justice system or whatever in the sense of a religious context will never be perfect to determine if this person is guilty or not, even if this is the way to teach humanity and to teach the community about not committing crimes. Okay. So there are no contradictions actually between death penalty and yeah.
Okay. Mr. Bassam, I want to take your comment on this. Like we've been hearing Mr. Mohammed Bailoun and also Mr. Hussein Itany.
I totally agree with Mr. Itany when he is speaking about the using of the death penalty as part of the political system. We spoke a lot about the penalty itself and how it is now prohibited by the international standards, but we didn't spoke about the process of justice in a lot of the countries where we have the weak legal system, or we have a corruption in the jurisdictional system, and also when you have a lot of unjust and unfair courts. And I think the latest example from Egypt is a very concrete example about what we are talking about. Speaking about again about the religious point of view in relation to such a practice, I think if we are speaking on Islam, for example, My point of view is related, is that we have to compare a little bit between the Islamic Arab states and also the Islamic states in general. There is a debate about this, but if some states they are too much stick to the sentences, and they are trying just to practice as if they are just reading the sentence, and the new approach and the new understanding of the Islam itself and the Quran itself will reach for another perspective and another view. And this is, for example, what is now practiced in a lot of states. For example, in the KSA now, lots of crimes that have been a lot of very strong punishments against, like the people that they are committed to. The thief, for example, they're gonna cut his hand, and a lot of other punishment, which is now actually under a lot of pressure to be forbidden, but unfortunately they are still practiced. Against women also, there is a lot of punishments that they are not accepted at all, and it's practiced in a lot of Islamic states. In another point of view, you can see a lot of Islamic communities and Islamic states that they are really very adopting the international standards, and they are trying to abolish such a practice, and they are part of the international debate to abolish capital punishment. So the understanding of the whole human rights approach for such a debate is a major and a very important factor in dealing with the whole case. And also the community itself, the way it's looking to the practice. We spoke a little bit about the revenge as a part of the cultural Arabic history, and the way that usually the tribes were, and the whole system of tribes.
So it's in the culture, revenge or the vengeance.
We have a modern state, but it is based on the tribes. You can see this in the elections results, even in the municipal election results. You can find that it is part of the tribe system.
So do you think there has to be a social reform before getting into this debate of...
it is a reform on all levels. We have to do some reform on the economical level. So for sure, when you have development and when you are eradicating poverty, for sure the crimes will be, records will be less. When you are teaching you have a new educational system, so the people will be more sympathizing each other, respecting each other, respecting the soul, respecting the person as a value. And also it is part of all our, let's say, commitment for a better life. This is if we summarize it, it's our commitment for a better life. When we are committed to a better life, for sure we are committed to abolish such a practice.
So as a result, if we commit this, as a result you'll have less crimes, as a result you'll be less needing of capital punishment,
for sure.
And this is what we're trying to call for in the human rights society.
But even with our criminal, with the criminal record of any country, abolishing the execution of any person must be a commitment. And usually when I notice, I've been in the Human Rights Council in the United Nations in Geneva, and a lot of Arab countries, when they were asked to abolish such a crime, they were accepting this because they are part of the international community, and they cannot speak
but in their countries.
But in their countries, unfortunately, they are not practicing this. Just because Human Rights Council, they don't have any obligations directly on any country.
Gentlemen, we'll take our last break for tonight's session, and after the break, we'll go to our last segment, which is the bullet point segment. Stay tuned.
In the world of business, numbers tell truth. Investors seek startups and bankers provide loans. Stocks rise and fall. Traders anticipate shipments and cargo ships unload. But we at Al-Ittijah News spin the globe to bring you your weekly dose of business news.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We go to our last segment, the third segment, which is bullet point segment, where I take certain bullet points and I ask my guests to comment on them. Now, the first one is about the death penalty. The first one says, death penalty puts innocent lives at risk. Now, since the reinstatement of the death penalty in the United States in 1976, 138 innocent men and women have been released from death row, including some who came within minutes of execution. In Missouri, Texas, and Virginia, investigations have been opened to determine if those states executed innocent men. To execute an innocent person is morally reprehensible. This is a risk we cannot take. Mr. Bassam, I'll take your comment on this first point, which is actually, this is a very interesting number. 138 innocent men and women have been released from death row, sometimes last minute. So we have a risk. When you're actually executing people, there's a margin of risk you're taking that these people might be innocent.
Yeah, and there is a lot of examples. The United States of America is a big example on this. Well, you know that the whole system, the judicial system, the jurisdiction itself is a little bit different from our system here in Lebanon and a lot of other countries. But you know that the evidence is related to the committee, and you can find like later on a lot of new evidence that will gonna appear, and for sure the long period of any trial for any person is part of the system to make sure that there is no innocent people that was under any execution. But you can find a lot of exceptions. I totally agree that, and I've said this, like the process of justice itself is part of the major reason to abolish such a practice.
Mr. Hussein, can I have your comment on this point? And can we also discuss the idea, can we discuss the case? Do you think we have such cases in the Arab world that are actually not examined? I mean, we're talking about the United States, with the judicial system is a bit better, we can say. But if you look at the situation in the Middle East, for example, I can't even. I'm afraid of even thinking of possibly how many innocent men and women were executed.
Of course, that's the problem with capital punishment, in the sense of it's inevitable. Once you've done it, that's it. The life was lost, and the lives of many were lost definitely, and were innocent. Unlike not having this capital punishment practice on those specifically political activists and crimes related to such political activity. And relating to that, we come here to the Arab nations. I do believe there are a lot of countries in the Arab Islamic states or Arabic states who are doing death penalty and the capital punishment, and we don't know about actually. And we're talking about countries who does not have transparency at their first priority, as a first priority. So not having transparency, not having a fair legal justice system. So all of this makes one wonder and worried about the fate of every person who lives under these countries in that sense. And yeah, so if we already have many people who are losing their life from wars and from terrorism, do we need actually to add this from states, some sort, if I may use this label, state terrorism?
Okay, that's interesting take. We'll go to the second bullet point, which is capital punishment does not deter crime. There's an argument that capital punishment deters crime. Well, scientific studies have consistently failed to demonstrate that executions deter people from committing crime. Now, around the United States, states without the death penalty have a lower murder rate than neighboring states with the death penalty. This was something we talked about, Mr. Bassam. That
I
death
totally
crime,
agree.
But according to the statistics also, there are some in the United States, the states which don't have the death penalty, you see the crime rate is actually lower in the states who have the death penalty. Is there a relation here? Is there a psychological thing we're not seeing, or the governments are not seeing?
To deter a crime, you need to, first of all, to have a community that is less poor, and this is the main reason, I think. And also where you can at least have the justice is not only in the court system, justice is in the tax system, justice in the unemployment, justice in the fair health care and education. So this is the way to deter a crime, not to abolish, not to practice the capital punishment.
Mr. Hussein, do you agree with our guest, Mr. Bassam, about the idea of deterring crime, about the idea that actually death penalty doesn't deter the crime, doesn't teach a lesson to criminals?
Actually, at first I used to use this alibi to call for abolishment of death penalty, and then I realized that as well there are many other studies that contradict this study, and there where I thought that definitely there's something towards cultural dimension about this, and some cultures are more susceptible to fear and others are not. So, but in the end, in both cases, whether it is, I do believe in moving forward from having people learning from other means than practicing death penalty on people. So it depends, I think, in the culture. It depends on the region. It depends on. I don't call for enforcing abolishment of death penalty. It should be something like some sort of collective the citizens of this country wants to abolish this death penalty. I'm not with enforcing such law more than creating a consensus, creating such awareness on such issue and having people to accept it more. So don't have all of a sudden, if I may say, terrorists who will fight the corrupt government who is not taking their justice, and will actually kill with their own hands. They will not go. They won't go for the government to take their rights.
And this is an idea that we see a lot in the Middle East. I mean,
exactly.
Honor crimes are. There are horrific examples of the exact thing you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. This is why I'm not completely with enforcing such abolishment. I'm with starting to create awareness, starting like Mr. Kantar said, education system, try to promote more peace values and empathetic values within our nation, and moving forward step by step. And what I discussed before, having, for instance, more difficulties and obstacles to create to implement this death penalty. For instance, in Lebanon, as I said before, it has to have the signature of the government, the parliament, the head of the parliament, and the presidency, the president. So having such measurements will help a little bit to clarify such issues and to build awareness with people who have such tremendous negative energy in them, and we need to release these negative energy.
Okay, now let's go to the third point, which is a horrific example. Saudi Arabia saw the execution of one man by crucifixion. Now, in Saudi Arabia, one accused man was put on display. He was put on display after being beheaded in a practice known as crucifixion, according to the country state's new agency, SPA. Your comment?
Well, I think that the human rights records of the Saudi Arabia is it needs an episode itself, because if you look back to the Amnesty International reports related to the way of the whole system, the trial, and the way that they invite the people to witness all the execution that is happening there, is something that really unacceptable. Speaking about national system related to the justice, is like always for political reasons, such countries adopt and recommend for other communities to, and they give them the right to speak about the international justice and the International Criminal Court. And for example, a lot of Arab countries were supporting the Libyan opposition for an international criminal court to for all the families of Gaddafi. Now we can find, like, now again the Libyan opposition, when they are in the authority, they are not accepting to hand over one of the Gaddafi's son to the International Criminal Court just because they think that their national system is the first system for his trial, and just because they are now still debating about the execution and whether this is execution.
Do you think the national system will do him just?
For sure not. For sure not. And I gave the example of the contradiction. When usually you use it for a political reason, you adopt something related to the International Criminal Code, even you don't read the Roma Convention, which is a convention. It's very clear that the execution or the capital punishment is not part of the whole system.
Okay. Allow me now to go to the next point of view, which is the next bullet point, which is according to Al Akhbar newspaper, the controversy surrounding the death penalty is nothing new, whether in Lebanon or the rest of the world. In a 2012 Gallup poll, up to 63% of the respondents said they were in favor of the death penalty for a person convicted of murder. Mr. Hussein, can I have your comment on that bullet point? According to a Gallup poll, 63% actually were with the death penalty. Now, what is, in your opinion, what is the reason that people still are not convinced that death penalty, the capital punishment, is not working, does not work?
You mean abolishment of the death penalty?
No, actually, the death penalty itself, yeah, abolishing it will do nothing. People believe, 63% of the people believe that death penalty is needed in a society.
That again reinforces the point that I had raised before, in the sense of having integrating more peace culture and education within these people who have very negative energy, negative emotions. We are talking about people who are living in a region filled with blood, filled with they are acquainted with death. Death is not a huge thing for them. It's not something that is unethical or immoral or does not hurt the human conscious. So we really simplify that. This is why I think the results actually are not very shocking. Actually, they're not very shocking. I expected. I'm sorry to say that, but I expected even more. Actually,
Mr. Hussein, you're an advocacy trainer. What do you think the civil society has to play? What is the role that it has to play? For example, let's take Lebanon as an example. What do you think the civil society has to do? And what is the job of, I mean, obviously the government has to do something about it, but let's talk about the civil society here. What do you think the role is?
The civil society actually needs first to understand why death penalty might not be the way to have more peaceful communities. For instance, recently with the case of the domestic violence and Manal Asi, I've heard that the offender will be sentenced to death crime, and people are actually cheering for it, even though the offense was very, very brutal and very hard, and I'm against definitely with what happened. But when I see human rights activists who are calling for domestic violence to end and to call for death penalty, this worries me actually, and this is where I see that actually need to advocate first within the human rights activists why capital punishment is not the best way to teach our community the lessons that we should learn about peace.
Okay, Mr. Bassam, one final question. We have 2 minutes. I'm going to ask you about a specific number in Lebanon, like 40 individuals, and at least 62 individuals were on death row in 2010, and there were 4 death sentences, but no executions so far. How is Lebanon doing when it comes to capital punishment?
They announced in 2010 in the United Nations Human Rights Council that the country is accepting and is practicing they call it the pending status of the capital punishment in Lebanon, where you can find the court that it is practicing the capital punishment, but the execution is not happening. And if we go back to the famous story of the ex-Prime Minister Salim Al-Hos, when he was when he was announcing one of the rare announcements of any political leader in Lebanon that he will not accept to sign any execution order, and later on he was like just absent during the cabinet meeting where the Minister of Internal Affairs, Michel Almor, signed all the execution orders, and there was more than 14, I think, execution. This was in 2000, and it was the last execution order that happened in Lebanon during that time. Now you can find a lot of people anxious about, like for example, yesterday there was a permanent decision by a court to execute a person who committed a crime against his wife, and it was a very harmful and unacceptable crime. But for sure, we cannot solve the domestic violence in Lebanon with the execution of
That's a whole different.
We have to at least to ratify, and it is now their chance, all the parliament members, to ratify the law for the domestic violence and the abolishing of domestic violence.
Mr. Bassam Kantar, journalist and human rights activist, thank you very much. Also, I would like to thank Mr. Hussein Itany, also advocacy trainer and human rights activist, and also Mr. Mohammed Bailoun for being with us via phone. Ladies and gentlemen, this was our episode about capital punishment and the practice and the arguments against or for. See you next week with a different case. Bye-bye.